Morning. My name is John DeBach, and if I haven't had the opportunity to meet you, I serve on the board of directors for the ministry and also have an opportunity to volunteer in the ministry. Several months ago, I did a video series on boundaries, and I want to follow up and revisit something that we briefly talked about back then. Given that we're headed into a new year, many of you are maybe thinking about resolutions, or I prefer to think of them as commitments to myself or commitments to others that I want to tackle in 2023. Regardless of where you are headed with your commitments or your resolutions, there is likely an opportunity for a boundary to be set in place. I think about if you are thinking about losing some weight or exercising, those are needs for or that those areas can also call for boundaries as well. As I was preparing this video, I was thinking about anything that was physical that didn't have a boundary, whether it's roads or houses or property and so forth. All of those have boundaries. I'm reading an amazing book right now by Lisa Turkhurst called Good Boundaries and Goodbyes. And I love to typically sit down and read, and I can devour a book in one setting. And this book, I've not been able to do that with. I've read and reread and highlighted and made notes. This is a fantastic book. So if you are struggling with a relationship or you're struggling with boundaries, I highly recommend this book. The very first sentence in the book just really got me from page one. The very first sentence says, "You cannot build trust that keeps getting broken." I want that to sink in. You cannot build trust that keeps getting broken. This is an incredibly powerful statement. Many women that we serve in the ministry are not only women who have experienced the physical loss of their mother, but many women still have mothers who are very much alive. However, they are either emotionally absent or they're narcissistic. So if that sentence strikes with you, I want to repeat it again. You cannot build trust that keeps getting broken. I am a very visual person, and my therapist actually uses a phrase with me that really resonates with me from time to time. And she talks about my emotional yard. And I want you to stop and think about your actual physical favorite yard, whether it's your own yard or maybe a neighbor's yard. But I want you to think about your own yard, your favorite yard, rather. Mine, if I can share mine with you, mine is nicely manicured. The grass is very green and lush, no weeds. There's beautiful flowers and shrubs and trees. And it's just perfect in my mind. It's perfect. And around that yard is a white picket fence. I guess I'm a little traditional there, but it's a white picket fence. But I've taken very careful care to plant flowers that will be hardy and climate friendly, and for me, ones that I can't kill. But this is my emotional haven. I think of this as my emotional yard. And when we are absent boundaries, others are going to come into our yard. So if this is your emotional yard, people, when you don't have boundaries or you don't have your white picket fence, people are going to come into your yard. They may even set up camp in your space. What this looks like in my own mind is people coming into my emotional yard and cutting down my trees or uprooting my flowers. And all of the while, if my boundaries aren't in place and if I don't have solid boundaries, I may actually have more than one person in my emotional yard. As I've thought carefully about how this happens, and in the notion of being completely open and vulnerable with you, I often invite others into my emotional yard. I give them full access because I have a tremendous desire to help others, or to me personally, sometimes to fix situations, not because I think I'm all that amazing, but because of my desire to help. Something I've recently come to, I say full terms with, but it may be more realistic terms with. Something I've came to more realistic terms with recently is my fear of abandonment and how that presents itself in my relationships. I will frequently try to solve, fix, take care of, babysit, nurture, or own oftentimes what isn't mine to own. And I do this in hopes that I will be loved. I have this notion that if I can do all of these things for someone else, I'll be able to finally prove my value and prove my worth, so that they won't leave, whether it's a physical leaving or an emotional abandonment. And in doing this, my quiet little yard, my little safe haven, my emotional yard with the perfectly planted flowers and shrubs and trees, it soon begins to resemble a state fair. Now that you know way more about me than you wanted to know, I encourage you to think about your own emotional yard and your boundaries. In her book, Lisa Turkhurst says that boundaries aren't just a good thing, they're a God thing. She mentions Jeremiah 5:22. I made the sand a boundary for the sea, an everlasting barrier it cannot cross. The waves may roll, but they cannot prevail. They may roar, but they cannot cross it. So if you're like me and you're struggling with boundaries of your emotional yard, I really encourage you to give true, sincere thought as to what that actually looks like, and consider where you may have greater need for greater boundaries. Until next time, thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, I pray that you are so blessed. Take great